on the dead. I always used to think it rather heartless of Jesus, as I remember, to say, let the dead bury the dead. In other words, if you're a living sort of person, forget about the dead, but only those who are more or less at the end of their lives or spiritually dead worry about that. But I now realize that it's a very central feature of how I was brought up and how Christianity in particular works, in that it makes an emphasis on the living, and ancestors in particular and the dead are relegated to a sort of limbo land of past things which are rather unimportant. This is, of course, very unusual in human societies, because in most parts of the world the dead are sometimes worshipped, often venerated, always respected, and funerals are great social occasions of the reordering of society. Whereas the world I grew up in, which is an extreme form of Christianity, it's Protestant evangelical Christianity to a certain extent, the dead were people in the past. So I was not interested in my ancestors, and funerals were something you went to and tried to summon up some respect and feelings about people who you hardly knew, and often just a very limited range. But while this is true of actual dead, of our own family and friends, I've increasingly realized that the dead are always with us and always influencing us. I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said that many sober, practical, down-to-earth people weren't aware that their lives were largely shaped and conditioned by the ideas of long ago dead philosophers or economists. That was roughly what he said, and I increasingly realize this is a case. As a historian, when I look around me, I find that many of the shapes of my intellectual landscape have been laid down by great thinkers, from Thomas Hobbes and John Locke to Montesquieu and Montaigne, and of course by great scientists who've shaped my material world. And that is something which I need to understand. If I'm going to understand myself, I need to understand these hidden currents and pressures, the pressures of Darwinianism, the pressures of the founding of the early Labour Party, or whatever it is, because without understanding those, I don't understand my own assumptions at a deeper level. Surface things, okay, we can forget the dead, they've gone, but at the really structural level of our deep thoughts, emotions, worldviews, then we are shaped by the dead. The Chinese, of course, recognize this much more than we do, and if you talk to Chinese nowadays, it's amazing that they constantly cite philosophers, poets, artists, and in particular, of course, the great philosopher Confucius and Mencius, Lao Tse, and so on, who lived well over 2,000 years ago, and yet they seem very relevant. And so I often cite recent people with ideas, Einstein or George Bernard Shaw or something like that, but I should, of course, be well aware, as I was taught at my school, about the influence and importance of Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, medieval philosophers. So we can let the dead bury the dead, but we can't bury the ideas of people over thousands of years who've shaped human history, and whose ideas we need to know in order to decide whether we agree or disagree with them. So long live, as it were, the dead.